investigations, not your fitness to practice internal investigations, but external investigations. And then I was thinking there's probably going to be a bit more of a kind of Q&A session. Okay, so three sort of main types of investigation that you're likely to be involved in supporting a student. If the student's implicated in an incident, that there's maybe been a complaint made about a patient, or there's been some kind of medication error. Secondly, if they're witness to an incident and they've been asked to give a statement and be interviewed as a witness, or if they've raised a concern themselves. So we'll just go through those individually. So I think firstly, if they've been implicated in an incident, I think the first thing you need to do is actually check the placement's policy. What policy are they following? I would request specific details of the incident. Quite often, allegations will be very kind of a bit woolly, a bit vague. At this stage, they don't actually have to give you the details. This is part of the investigation, the fact-finding. But I would quite strongly argue that if there's, I don't know, if it's a medication error, something like that, that you actually have sight of the documents, of the care plan and so on, medication chart. If it's a complaint, that you ask for a copy of the complaint. You may get it, you may not, but one of those things kind of, if you don't ask, then you definitely won't get. I think support the student to provide a factual statement, and we'll talk a little bit more about statements towards the end, and also supporting them to maybe produce a reflective piece. If they're not quite sure what it is they've been accused of, that might be difficult. But again, we'll talk a little bit about writing reflective statements towards the end. Okay, if they're asked to be a witness in an investigation, again, I would check which policy the placement is following. I know that the students are not employees and therefore they're not subjected to disciplinary processes within an organisation, but I think it is important that you know which policy the organisation is following, because that will give you some idea of kind of time scales and processes. I think if somebody's taking interview notes, then ask who those notes will be shared with, and whether there is the potential for the student to be called as a witness. They should say at the start of any investigatory interview, especially if the student's there as a witness, they should advise that any statements that they take or interview notes that they take may well be shared with the person who's maybe the alleged wrongdoer. So I think you do need to check and be clear about that. Again, at the end of the interview, I think it's really important to just ask for time scales, because again, sometimes they won't relate to what's actually said in the policy. A lot of policies have very unrealistic time scales, and again, if this is kind of quite a big investigation that entails quite a lot of people being interviewed, because of the nature of shifts and things, depending on the time of year, if it's holiday time, it could take, well, some take months rather than weeks. Okay. So, and thirdly, if the student's formally raised a concern, again, check which policy they're using. You know, is it the freedom to speak, the whistleblowing policy, or is it something specific to them that they feel they've been individually bullied or victimised? So again, check which policy that you're using. Again, support the student to prepare a statement. Again, check who the interview notes will be shared with. It's really difficult because there is no kind of automatic right to anonymity. I think if the student is saying that they want it to be anonymous, their concerns, whilst the organisation will often try to protect that right, sometimes it actually prevents them from doing a full investigation, and it may be that they're not able to take things forward if the person doesn't want to be named. because maybe being named, it would be obvious who they were. Then that just makes it very difficult sometimes for the organisation to take any further action. Again, at the interview, I would ask for timescales. If the concerns have been raised under the whistleblowing policy, then remember there is a requirement that the organisation keeps whistleblowers fully informed of the investigation's progress as it goes on. This should be true of all investigations, but under guidance and legislation, then specifically with whistleblowers, they do have to keep them informed. Okay, so in the actual interviews, there's no legal right to have representation in an investigatory interview. What I would say is I've never come across an NHS trust that wouldn't allow somebody to have representation, to have a workplace colleague or a trade union representative with them. A lot of independent sector organisations, small nursing homes, where somebody may be on a placement, they very often will refuse for the person to have anybody with them at an investigatory stage. The only time that you have got a legal right to representation is if there's the potential for a sanction to be issued, which again in a student's case, then an organisation that they're on placement is not going to be able to issue a sanction or any kind of disciplinary warning against the students. That wouldn't apply. So during the interview, I think well, prior to the interview, I think it's really important that you do spend some time with the student and that you do fully understand what the issues are. In the interview, you can't answer on the student's behalf, but you can prompt them, which is why I say it's really important that you are kind of fully aware of their account, because quite often they forget, or it's a really anxious time for them, and I find myself very often saying to the person that I'm with, just saying, "Oh, you shared with me about such and such, did you want to share that with the investigators? Or you told me about this, I think that might be important for you to share with them." And I think that's quite helpful, and you can do that, but you obviously can't answer on their behalf. Again, you can request a break for any reason. So if you feel that the student's getting upset or finding it difficult, very anxious and finding it difficult to answer the questions, then I would ask for a break. If they're kind of beginning to, I don't know, maybe dig themselves in a bit deeper, or they're getting emotional and they're using language that's a bit inappropriate, or their voice is becoming more and more raised, or they're getting angry or upset, again, request a break. Just take them out for 10 minutes, just get to calm down. You can, whilst you can't answer on their behalf, I would say you can challenge inappropriate questions. So it might be, I don't know, that they're being asked about medical details, of their own personal medical details, something that you feel it's not appropriate, that it's got nothing to do with the allegations or the situation that's being discussed, and you can actually say, "I don't think that's appropriate." Again, if needs be, you can take a break, go out, discuss it with the student, and then go back in. Okay. So before you go into the interview situation, I would advise a student that if they can't remember, if they're asked a question they can't remember, or they don't know what it is they're being asked, then to say so. It's much better to do that than to try and sort of mumble or stumble through and then maybe talk about things that are inaccurate or actually nothing to do with the incidents that are being investigated or the concerns. Again, advise them to take their time, and that you will prompt them to take a break if they do need to consider any answers, not to rush into anything. Again, I would not be pressurised into some, not very often in NHS trusts, but in some other placements, it may be that they're asked to, somebody takes notes at the time and they're asked to sign the notes at the end of the meeting. Unless it's something very simple, straightforward, and they read through and they're very happy, I would say no, ask them to send the notes to you, that you can go through them with the student. Also, I would advise that you always take your own notes, and then you can look at those and cross-match them with the notes that you've been provided. It's amazing how many things are left out, or kind of weight given to certain things that are then taken a bit out of context. So I think it's important that you do take some notes of your own, and I said that you then cross-match those, but do that kind of not in the sort of heat of the moment, that you do that afterwards. The other thing, just to point out, that nobody can be forced to give evidence if it would criminally implicate them. So just trying to think if
well, they might ask the student what they did if they're talking about witnessing something that their mentor did or other people did, and they might be asked, well, did you not intervene, or what did you do, or you didn't do anything? Was that right? Do you think that's right or wrong? It's those sort of questions, isn't it? It should be factual. Not what do you think about something, or what you did or didn't, or what you didn't do is more like more.
But I think or I don't know if medications have been going missing from the ward. And they were trying to establish whether the student nurse had any part in that. That would obviously be a criminal offence, and I said nobody can be forced to give evidence if it criminally implicates them. That would then, you're going up a notch then to make sure that somebody's got legal advocacy, which is a kind of different ball game really. Okay. So looking at, oops, sorry, we've gone on one, two.
Go right click it.
Right. So in terms of supporting students with preparing statements, I think the kind of initial bit obviously needs to be their personal details with professional address. Again, where their current placement is, what they're actually responding to. So is it that they're responding to the allegations that X, Y and Z, or that they've been asked to prepare a witness statement, or that they are raising their concerns. Again, if they're raising their concerns, they need to specify under kind of what policy they want to raise their concerns. Again, I think it's important to kind of say what the statement's based on. Is it personal recollection, review of records, observations, or is it a combination? And I think within that, so I'm going to move on a bit, it's really important to make sure that it is factual, that you are consistent in terms of what you're saying, like making it in the first person. So we would always suggest that you use the first person, so e.g. I, and that remains consistent throughout. Obviously avoiding jargon, trying to keep things in a chronological order, and quite often when we get members coming through that are quite distressed, that may have been witness to or alleged to have done something wrong, quite often the first thing we'll do is get them to just set out a chronology, and that's actually helpful to them in starting to put things in a kind of logical order in their mind, and then you can start working on that in terms of a statement. So yeah, be consistent using things like AM, PM, 24-hour clock, and then also making clear again what's personal sort of recollection and what they can actually state as being fact, because you've got maybe some documentary evidence to back that up. Okay. It is acceptable to form a view based on professional judgment. Again, that's going to kind of vary depending on if it's a first-year student nurse on her first placement, then it's probably their professional judgment is not going to have so much weight as if it's a third year student who's maybe been on that ward for 5-6 weeks. Then that would have more weight. So you can put your professional judgment, but they're going to have to be prepared to be questioned on how did they come to that judgment. We always advise, don't assume that the reader understands the kind of context and so on. Write it as though it's a non-nurse reading it, because very often if something, even sometimes with investigations, it won't necessarily be a nurse that's undertaking the investigation. Very often if things go through to a hearing, it may well be the divisional manager that will hear the case, and they may not be somebody from a professional background. So get them to go through it as though it's a lay person. Obviously don't speculate using native language, anything that could be questioned at a hearing, saying things like they were challenging patient. Again, they're going to have to explain what do they mean by a challenging patient. The other one is sometimes putting in random sort of exclamation marks. It can be quite difficult trying to explain at a hearing why you've put an exclamation mark on the end of a sentence. What does, so the patient was challenging, exclamation mark, what do you mean by that? And also keep patients' names anonymous. If it's staff, then they need to put their full names where they know them and titles, but where it's patients, to actually keep that anonymous. And if they have got any documentary evidence that they've been provided with, I don't know, medicine charts, anything like that, then they should be, like the patient's name, should be blanked out. Okay. Statements. Reflection. I'm not going to go through reflection with you because I'm sure you're far better qualified than I am. The only thing that I was going to share with you is our legal team that support registered nurses going through NMC procedures. They provide some guidance for them on preparing statements, and I think it's obviously if you're going up to the NMC, then normally there's allegations that have been made against you. And if there were any mistakes, omissions on the student's part, then it's about understanding, having that real insight, understanding what went wrong, and about accepting what role they played in that, and actually taking responsibility. And that's something that the NMC look for, rather than a registered nurse trying to kind of blame it on everybody else. Looking to see what should have been done differently, that they recognise how they would act differently in future to avoid any repetition, and appreciating the impact that the actions potentially could not have had on others. So I recognise this is for registered nurses, but I think it's some quite good points that you can use with students. And that's it.
Right. I'm going to unmute everybody now. So you can ask your questions, or you can type them into the chat box. Anybody got any questions for Lynn?
I suppose I have a question, just of where you see people go wrong, or I know you've given some examples when you're talking, but where do people go wrong in sort of giving statements, or what are the common places where people go wrong?
I think one of the things is about taking responsibility, so it's not about blaming everybody else. So I think that's one area, and quite often when we're looking at statements, and the sort of reflective part of it is about actually showing some insights in, okay, definitely, you know, the person didn't intend to harm on this occasion, but potentially, you know, there could have been harm, and actually what was my role in that, and I have to take responsibility for that. So I think that's one of the kind of key areas is that lack of insight. Other ones is where they're kind of just a bit all over the place, and that's why I said sometimes just getting them to start off by doing a chronology is quite useful, because some statements just here, there and everywhere, and then trying to actually make sense out of them in a kind of some kind of logical order is difficult. I think those are kind of the main things. So it's like insight and actually having something that flows in a chronological order, that comes across sort of logical. The other one is obviously trying to just put as much detail in terms of dates, any witnesses to any actions or events as well. So if they were, I don't know, if it's a patient complaint, again, who was with them at the time, trying to think through that and putting those details down. Any other questions anybody's got or comments? No?
I have another one if that's okay. Are they, do you find that students often have their own practice questioned? If they're giving a statement or a witness statement, do you find that students get trusts or other people coming back and saying, well, why didn't you intervene? Why didn't you challenge that nurse or that sort of thing? And to what degree are they expected to? Obviously, a first year can't necessarily challenge the matron.
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult, and I think most investigating officers would appreciate that it'd be quite difficult for a first year to be challenging a matron. However, just done a session actually for students on whistleblowing and duty of candor, and it is everybody's responsibility to actually speak up, and if they feel that they can't speak up at the time, that they then have maybe spoken to their mentor on the ward, or if they feel they can't speak to the mentor, then they've spoken to their tutor or somebody else as quickly as possible after the event. So I think that would kind of support them. So I think Adele's just going to say
goodbye. I'm going to lead into it. She's never done a webinar before. She's doing a good job. I've left you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think they accept that they might not be able to challenge, but they need to have then raised it with somebody as soon as possible after the event, and that would be the mitigation. Okay, we've got a couple of others questions here. What if the student mentions something to you that has no relevance?
No, that has relevance.
I think, I mean, if it's got no relevance, then I would advise them or not to put it in their statement, because I think
that's not what it says.
Oh, sorry.
It says if it's relevant to the situation.
Oh, sorry. What if the student mentions something to you that has relevance to the situation when no one else is present, e.g. before being asked to make a formal statement? So are you saying that even if there's not an investigation, that the students flagged something up to you
No, I've had a situation where students mentioned something quite important, but there's been no one else in the room. You know, we've just arranged for a meeting with the student, and the students mentioned something before anybody else comes into the room that's actually important. So if you are just accompanying them while they give a witness statement, but they have mentioned something to you that you think is important, what would you do?
I mean, I think you can, depending on what it is, you could either, like I said to you, you can prompt them to say, oh, you talked to me about such and such. I think that would be,
okay.
I think that would be relevant for you to share that. if you're not quite sure whether they want to share it or not, then I would ask for a break and go out and talk to them and say, I think you really need to tell them about what you were telling me earlier. I think that's really important to share that. So
That's really important. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? No. We have the RCN on the website. We have got guidance for people making statements that takes them through kind of a logical step, and you can print it. It's a fact sheet that they can print off. You don't actually need to be a member to access that. Obviously, if they are members of the Royal College of Nursing, we're always really happy to look through statements if they've been asked to provide a statement. If they're members, then and we won't usually go if they've been asked to be a witness, because this is not enough of us, I'm afraid. And depending on, we look at where they've been invited to an investigation, if there's kind of alleged concerns against them, we look at those, but usually if they are implicated, then we would attend with them. As I said, if they're going as a witness, then we wouldn't normally go with them. Again, if it's about them raising concerns, we'll talk through with them. If they're members, we'll talk that through with them and see whether they feel happy to go and talk to their mentor or the ward sister or whatever on their own initially. And then obviously if they're not getting anywhere, then we can talk through with them about how we can support them in escalating their concerns. And we will usually say to them, you know, to obviously include their tutors as well. Okay. That's all the questions. I'll thank you very much. And I'll say goodbye. Oh.
Bye. Go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Oh.